Hello and welcome to Oakland Creates Art Makers interview series. Today we have Tyler Cohen, awesome cartoonist, comic book makers, zine maker as well. I'm gonna share my screen and have Tyler introduce themselves. Can you see the slides there?
Right. Oh, there I am.
Awesome. Just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know this is probably an older bio, so just elaborate a little bit.
My name's Tyler Cohen. Yep, cartoonist, graphic designer, educator. My most recent book, which is not on there, is Feather, which is it's called a surrealist wordless fable in comic storytelling, but more of a fine art bent. Um, I also did the book Primahood Magenta, which is a graphic memoir, which also mixes surrealism and autobio vignettes to create kind of a larger query into what is female and while parenting my offspring for their first 10 years. I've contributed to numerous anthologies as well as the online magazine Mother.
Nice. So I'm gonna share a couple of images. I really wanted to ask you about your choices in terms of the style of art, the watercolors or inks, and the line work in color. Can you just talk a little bit about some of that?
Sure. This is older work at this point to me. These are my primazons. They are a surreal characters that came from my unconscious. A lot of them into kind of almost an anthropological observation of these beings that yeah, it's all ink. I've never worked with watercolor. I don't know how to use watercolor. I've put all my skill development into working with ink. These are colored India inks. And first of all, I really love working with color. Oh, there's Feather. Uh, Color to me has its own narrative properties. Um, Both because color can tap into social cultural meanings that can be played with as well as visceral temporal emotional meanings, and you can play with all of that as well as uh, just like line work. Color activates in our body. For people who can see it, activates in our bodies. um, I'm very
Did you
committed.
did you choose ink over watercolor? I know it's definitely a different technique, but I feel like ink is more um spontaneous and you have to, sort of own the line work that you're creating, whereas watercolor can be manipulated quite a bit more. Like ink, once it's there, it's sort of there, right?
Yeah, you have to commit. So what you have on screen right there, Feather, those are using ink pencils
Hmm.
instead of a liquid ink, but you still bring liquid into it. So you kind of get the joy of both pencil mark making and brush mark making, which is, bringing together two pleasures, right? And also two different kinds of textural play. But once the water gets in there, the ink pencils that's it. You cannot re-manipulate them. They
I
are,
was gonna say, and
yeah.
when you are deciding on the design, do you use a layer of pencil drawing first, or is it directly into the
Oh, yeah, no, I need pencils and I need clear pencils.
right?
That way I can just lose myself in the inking and the color and the mark making. And I don't have to problem solve the image. It's the composition,
Right.
right? I worked out the composition in the pencils.
And so that's a great segue into the photo on my right. I don't know if it's your left or my right, where you were in studio and you was that
That was a
a
residency.
residency. Can you talk a little bit more about the residency? Because I feel like your work for Feather sort of came out of that, or no?
No, Feather was at the printer at the time when I was in the residency, but it was my most recently finished work, and I was still very committed to working with the. That's where I first used the ink pencils,
Okay.
uh, and I was still committed to working with them since. I fell in love with them as a medium. So the residency was it was a gift for real.
Hmm.
That was a summer residency uh, at 836 M Art Organization. Rena A. Yang, Tin Pham, and Janelle Hessig, and myself had this beautiful opportunity to um, create work in their gallery space uh, for a couple months. And we each had to produce a story that was focused around San Francisco, preferably the Jackson Square area where the gallery is located. And we had a certain minimum number of hours. We had to be there a week in person, which was 8. And people could come through and observe us working, which was a little weird, right? But it was also wonderful because comics is such a solitary process in the making of it. And for people who don't make comics, all they see is the final product, right?
Right.
The book, the zine that's in their hands. They don't get the opportunity to see how much work goes into making it, but even what that work is, right?
Right.
It's a
So
very
I'm gonna stop you and stop sharing my screen so we can see your face as you explain a little bit, and then we'll jump into some of the written questions.
so in that photo that you were sharing, that was I was still early in the process. I wasn't anywhere near at the inking part. I was figuring out my story in my sketch notes and such. And I had Feather up on the wall there, both to share what my work, most recent work is, but also, again, thinking about colors, thinking about textures. The work I created for that uh, residency was very different than Feather. It was more a callback to the memoir type work I'd done with Parma Hood Magenta, but it was also I created something I called a future memoir. Uh,
Hmm.
it was a short story that was ostensibly a autobiography story, but it's set in the future. Uh,
Wow.
so I could, because I, like many people, have my climate anxieties, um, like everybody. And so it was my way of kind of coming up with a hope punk story where I was imagining San Francisco taking um, kind of ecologically based mitigations to climate change,
Hmm.
and then just locating it in a personal story of a kind of a day or a couple days in the life in that future San Francisco.
Is that gonna be published or put into a larger anthology? Or...
So we have a limited edition anthology of all our work. I've also offered my short story as a zine.
Nice, nice. And it's titled.
What was it titled? Oh, it's time to make the change. Something
Huh.
like
And the artwork you had on the wall for Feather, is that the size that you worked in? Is that 11 by 17?
I have been working 9 by 12.
9 by 12. Yeah, it's not similar. That's kind of similar what I'm working. So I'm gonna jump into the first question, which is where did you grow up? And I don't think I've ever asked you that.
Mostly in New Jersey. I spent some toddler years in Ohio.
Okay. Were you born in Ohio and then moved to New Jersey or your family?
Yeah, both my parents were from New York, but my dad had a job in Cleveland.
Mm.
But what I remember is our backyard, right? And my mother also was teaching kids. She did her grad school at Cleveland Art Institute.
Hmm.
So she was teaching kids there, so I got to kind of wander around the museum a little bit as a small child. So those are some of my best memories from there.
That's really cool. Oh man. Yeah, I mean, me and my brothers were born all around the Midwest. I'll go. Is art political inherently, or is all art political?
Okay, I think that all art can be political in that art at its core inspires questioning, thinking, curiosity, observation, contemplation, conversation, right? And for example, fascism doesn't like us to
Question?
think for ourselves or to question,
Right.
right? So all art, um, good art, I think engages us in that. And it also it takes us out of that just, I mean, there's entertaining art, but it takes us out of that entertainment passive mindset, but instead activates our minds and bodies. At least that's what I think art does and should do. And particularly, like, I know I often am coming from a place where I'm inspired because there's some things I want to talk about and be in conversation about, right?
For
So
sure. And do you think just by the act of picking up a paintbrush or a pen or pencil and starting that journey for yourself, I feel like that is also political, right? Just the decision to do that versus doing something else, like watching TV or, reading a book or going for a jog. Just the act itself of being a vessel for creativity, I feel like is political a lot of times.
sadly, yes. And I say sadly because thinking for ourselves and being present in the moment shouldn't have to be political,
Yeah,
right? But it is.
it is. I think so for sure, especially in capitalist society where if you're doing something that is not for that's not transactional or seen as a commodity, oftentimes looked at as weird. Like, you
And it
know,
takes you out of time, right? In certain ways. Like if you're when you're art making, whatever the art is, you become very present and also even while you're in a dream state. So in some ways you're not present, in other ways you're present, but you are in this altered state of being and this altered time.
yeah,
And capitalism doesn't operate like that. Capitalism has a clock,
yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
Not that deadlines don't help.
Is there one challenge that you find as an artist that sort of comes up, a challenge to either making art or creating the space and time for art?
Yes, capitalism, first of all. I mean, having to make a living,
Right.
that takes time and energy. Um, Also, for me, I can get emotionally overwhelmed, and while some people went with big life things, and for some people they're able to immediately channel that into their work. I'm not one of those people.
Hmm.
I'm a slow processor, and so I can freeze up. Art is what helps me to unfreeze, but it can take a moment. It can take a minute, you know.
Right. No, I understand that. I think for me, a lot of people who are, I want to say more externally, external processors or verbal processors are able to do that. And I think for myself, yeah, I'm much more of an internal, more quiet processor, and I have to shift I can compartmentalize, and I think unfortunately I'm good at that because there's no way I would be able to function. Like I said, if your emotions start to overwhelm, and I really, it's such a double-edged sword for me because it's easy for me to kind of turn that corner, turn that switch off, which sometimes it's hard to turn it back on, right? And but to be productive and to get things done, yeah, unfortunately, uh, um, I have to be able to do that, especially as someone who is in a space as an artist and as an organizer, or as someone who works outside of the creative space at a 9 to 5. Like you have to be able to, like I can't take that stuff with me. You know what I mean? And that's like I said, sadly, we probably all have some capacity to do that. Uh,
I like to blame being born under the sign of Cancer.
No, I'm totally a Sagittarius. Like maybe that is a skill set of a Sagittarius is we don't care. We have the ability to not care. But like I said, that's dangerous slope to go down because you don't want to become like that 100%. But I think cancer's, oh my gosh. Did I know you were a cancer? You guys are very touchy-feely, very emotional, very driven by emotion.
Yes, but I have that Libra rising to help balance it. So
Yeah, well, wow. And I let's not talk about let's not talk about zodiac this whole
conversation.
oh my gosh. Um, people often ask what's the best gift that you've received. I want to know what's the best gift you've given to someone else.
Mm. Oh, that's a tough one. Like material gift or
No, it doesn't have to be material.
okay. I mean, I would say that okay, when I've had the opportunity to teach and being able to make space for other people to explore their own voices is something that I really value.
Mm,
Um, is it arrogant to call that a gift?
no, not at all.
Um,
Not all instructors can do that.
and I hope I've done that.
Right?
That's
I'm sure you've had instructors that it has to be their way and it's
oh
very
yeah,
strict A, B, C, and D, and they
yeah.
don't allow, even in art, they don't allow for exploration. You have to do it this set way.
I
So,
mean, it's not like I don't give assignments, or I didn't. I haven't had the opportunity to teach for a while. But I feel like, especially for people who I want people to play, right? To explore and yeah, because there are so few spaces, especially in like college environments or whatever, for people to really just um not just have to follow ABCD, but to especially because comics are a creative personal storytelling,
right,
right? Even if you're doing nonfiction, it's still personal storytelling and you have to feel safe to be able to investigate.
right.
So hopefully I've created safe spaces for people to explore. Um,
That's huge.
at least that's what I intend to do when I teach a class. I don't always know, who knows, but that would be it.
No, I've had teachers who totally, like I said, they sort of taught by example that art making is part of your daily practice, what you do, what we consider outside of art. And they allowed us to incorporate that into, or showed us that if we go to the movies as a class or we take a trip as a class, that is art, that's part of your art making process. And I think instructors, professors that allow you that growth, it's a huge gift, Tyler. I think there aren't very many instructors that are open enough and in touch with themselves to move back, take a step back and remove their ego out of it because you can't control the outcome of that. A lot of teachers want to be able to say, "Oh, here's a project, you got an A on it." You know what I
Oh,
mean?
I hate grading because I don't feel like art can be graded.
Right, right. So allowing students to play in that way and explore, because you don't know the process, you don't know the outcome. I think that that's definitely a huge gift, and I think, no, you're onto something there because
I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to teach in quite some time.
but we still, we don't see it that we don't see that enough where
Yeah.
they remove themselves out of the thing. Like they're almost referees and they want to be part of it.
Well, you will see often students coming out of some program whose art all looks similar because their teachers are
Exactly.
basically asking for a similar thing from all of them, which is often that teacher's own style.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cut and paste for sure. No, there are some schools where you're like, oh, that student went to RISD or that
Hmm.
student went to CCA because of the work they're producing. And they've
Hmm.
all had those same teachers. Oh, you went to San Jose State. Yeah, I can tell. And disclaimer, none of those schools, this is just example, not shitting on any of those schools.
Just examples of schools, not of particular art styles.
Exactly.